Good evening, everyone. So we're going to start. Thank you all so much for being here. Great to see you all. Slightly chaotic in the building because they're preparing for postgraduate shows. But yeah, lovely to gather all here today at LCC. My name's Annie Goh. I'm the course leader of BA Sound Arts, and I'm delighted to be putting on this event, hosting in collaboration with the 87Press, and two amazing poets, Nat Raha and Nisha Ramayya. So I'm just going to speak very, very briefly, and then I'm going to hand over to Azad Ashim Sharma. I'm also going to introduce our guests. I guess I just wanted to say a bit about the course and the location of where we are here, which we call LCC Sound Arts, which consists of an undergraduate degree and a postgraduate degree and a research centre, creative research in sound arts practice, which recently celebrated 20 years of world-leading sound arts practice and research. If you're interested to learn more, to celebrate 20 years, we somehow decided to make 20 radio programs, which was a lot of work. But you can listen back to them on Resonance Extra. It's called Listening with Chris app. And yeah, just a bit about the program. We try to offer a really broad curriculum for students to explore critical, creative and technical kind of knowledge and practice in sound. We are, as it stands, the kind of only undergraduate sound arts program left standing in the UK, which is slightly depressing. So hopefully we will still be here in 5, 10, 20 years, we will see. We recently kind of revalidated the course, so we're now accepting students for the first time in our first year, got some of our first year students here, into BA Sound Arts with Design and BA Sound Arts with Experimental Music. So it's not a big change, but we've kind of rebranded ourselves slightly in the hope of kind of being able to compete with some of the other courses in the kind of general situation of lots of attacks on arts and humanities degrees in the UK. But we're really proud of what we do with our course, and yeah, it's great to be able to have the guest lecture series, which Nat presented at this afternoon. Just a really amazing kind of diversity and breadth of sound art practices, which we try, if anyone has been in my Introduction to Sound Arts unit in the first year, it's all about kind of continuously trying to push the boat out and not kind of hem ourselves in with defining what sound arts is and isn't. And yeah, I suppose the idea for today's event came in conversation with Azad. And yeah, we kind of build it as poetry and sound arts. And I guess I just wanted to say a few words reflecting on how when we talk about sound arts, there are a few kind of overlapping areas. So often we discuss kind of Dada and kind of concrete poetry, sound poetry from those early days. We talk about fluxus and event scores, text scores. So there's always been a kind of presence of text as a place and a form that sound art happens in. Yet when people talk about sound arts, it seems quite kind of divorced from the field of poetry, or they're both kind of very distinct and kind of separate fields. And maybe that had to be that way for kind of historical reasons, but it feels like now is the right time to think about softening those borders, and tonight's event is a kind of little step in that direction of just blurring those borders a little bit more. So we hope there will be more events like these to come. And yeah, I wanted to thank the Student Experience Fund for generously funding tonight's event, and thank GEMS and Shura, Joseph Gruner, who unfortunately can't be here, who co-organised this event with me here at LCC. We are recording, by the way, so just so everyone's aware, we're not streaming, but we are recording. And yeah, that's all I will say, apart from introducing our guests. So, second time I'm reading your bio today, Nat. Dr. Nat Raha is a poet and activist scholar. She is the author of 4 books of poetry, including Apparitions, Nines, and of Sirens, Body, and Faultlines. With Mijke van der Drift, Nat is co-author of Trans Femme Futures, Abolitionist Ethics for Transfeminist Worlds, alongside articles in Social Text and the Funambulist, co-editor of Radical Transfeminism zine. Nat's critical and creative writing appears in Queer Print in Europe, Transgender Marxism, The Brooklyn Rail, Wasafiri, Verses, and a correspondence with Nisha Ramayya appears in Gestures, a body of work. Nat's performance work includes, I still can't say this word, epistolary on Carceral Islands, co-commissioned by Edinburgh Art Festival and Tolka Festival of Visual Arts Galway. And Nat teaches in Fine Art Critical Studies at the Glasgow School of Art. And thank you again for coming all the way down from Edinburgh today. Nisha Ramayya works across poetry, criticism, and collaborative performance, and teaches creative writing. She's the author of 2 poetry collections, Fantasia, which was published on Granta 2024, and States of the Body, produced by Love, on Ignota 2019, and reissued Spiral House editions 2025, as well as the co-authored pamphlets, Threads and Siblings, among other publications. Fantasia hazards a listening walk through seashells, telecommunication networks, and cosmic vibrations to learn something new about how we sound. Alice Coltrane's experiments in jazz and spiritual community guide these poems that hum and glitch, that leap across space-time, landing and reflecting the discordant music of life on Earth. And I'll hand over to Azad shortly. Azad Ashim Sharma is the director of the 87Press and serves as poetry editor at Philosophy and Global Affairs and the CLR James Journal. He's also the commissioning editor of the Hythe Review. He's a PhD candidate in English and Humanities at Birkbeck College, University of London. He's the author of 3 poetry collections, most recently Boiled Owls on Nightboat Books, 2024, which was shortlisted for the Jalak Poetry Prize. His second collection, Ergastulum, Vignettes of Lost Time, on Broken Sleep Books 2022, was the recipient of the Caribbean Philosophical Association's Nicolas Cristobal Guillen Batista Outstanding Book Award. And earlier this year, in July 2025, Azad was inaugurated as the Poet Laureate of the Caribbean Philosophical Association. He lives in South London and is currently working on a novel and his 4th collection of poetry. So yeah, really excited to be having you as our guests here at LCC Sound Art, and I will hand over to you, Azad.
I'm reading off a script, so I'm going to use the standing mic. But thank you so much, Annie, and to all of the staff at LCC who've made this event possible, and to you all for being here. I thought I would kind of open the space with a little bit more about the 87Press, which may be useful for students and faculty here thinking about the connections that we are trying to draw as a press between sound arts and poetry. So I hope you'll indulge me a little bit, and I will also give a kind of very short and brief personal, critical engagement with Nat and Nisha's work, which has followed me over the last decade, or I have followed their work over the over the last decade, since I was a wee undergrad at the University of Sussex. So I hope you'll indulge me a little bit there too. The 87Press is a literary publisher focusing mainly on poetry. We were founded in 2018 with the idea of centering writers who were traditionally underserved or underrepresented in the publishing industry, specifically those from LGBTQ+, global majority, neurodivergent, and working class communities. We publish online and in print, and we host regular events and workshops. Our event series, Mushaira, runs at Cafe Otto, which I'm sure you know is more renowned as a music venue. We're a non-profit organisation and an Arts Council England National Portfolio organisation. We are signatories to the Palestinian academic and cultural boycott of Israel, and we are ardent supporters of fossil-free books, and we have a growing international reputation. For example, we are distributed gratefully by the wonderful Wesleyan University Press in the USA and Canada. What began as a reading series and a chapbook has now blossomed into a well-oiled publishing house, putting out between 12 and 15 new titles a year, with a journal project that was initially a kind of blog journal called The Hive, and there are some QR codes on the front row there where you can scan and be directed to that fledgling journal and read Nat and Nisha's publications on it. But as of spring 2026, this is evolving into the Hive Review in partnership with the Open Library of the Humanities, and we will be trying to create a new space for cultural criticism and experimental poetics there, so do keep a lookout. By that date, in March 2026, we will have published 60 books. So please do look us up. There's also another QR code where you can go to bookshop.org, where we've created a kind of list of Nat and Nisha's publications, so if you like what you hear, you can purchase it ethically. Nat and Nisha, both as members of the international writing community that the 87Press is proud to be part of, and as guiding exemplars of the kind of poetics we are singularly interested in as a press, have been longtime collaborators and friends. Perhaps most relevant to those of you exploring sound arts and or the sonic in its multiple registers, tonight's event in many respects is an outgrowth of an organic and meandering conversation we've perhaps not had the chance up until now to articulate in this kind of institutional and intellectual context. So a little bit about that context. With the publication of Danveer Singh Bra's Beefy's Tune during the COVID-19 pandemic, the 87Press welcomed a burgeoning wave of sonic consideration into both online publications and events. Strands of experimental performances and writing that is deeply engaged with the sonic are palpably felt on our list, and Nat and Nisha, whose publications I meant on the Hive, they were among the first and most enduring examples of this articulation that the 87Press is but one of many homes of. With regards to a critical engagement, we might hold in our minds the historic traditions of poetry, particularly those from what is today called South Asia, a place Nat, Nisha, and myself can trace lineage and heritage to, and the incorporation of music and poetry as both fundamental to poetic language and form, and the time signatures of the music itself. This interrelation between time as a signature of presencing voice through musical utterance is something that I think guides my engagement with both Nat and Nisha's growing poetic oeuvres. A more modern example of this may come from the Caribbean. The tracing of calypso music, for example, and the call and response technique renowned in genres such as dub, which Kamal Brathwaite makes felt through an extrapolated line of cultural influence, harkening back to recordings of T.S. Eliot reading The Wastelands. And Kamal Brathwaite does this in a wonderful lecture called The History of Voice, which I warmly recommend to you. In many respects, the syncretic cultural production of South Asia meets the creolizing of symbolic life in the Caribbean as concerns this uniquely 21st century iteration of a nexus between poetry and sound. It strikes me too as an altogether oblique strategy that could be linked to the practices of Bob Cobbing, the sound poet, and also the historic avant-garde such as Dadaism. Yet the interventions into and extensions of such cross-cultural lineage made by Nat and Nisha's work exemplify a turn to sound that incorporates breath, echo, onomatopoesis, about which more later, alongside considerations of climate justice, speculative politics, the body, decolonization, transfeminism, alter cosmologies of consciousness raising. And they really exemplify the emergence of a different register to the sonic ecologies associated with black and politically black music in the early 21st century, as studied by Danveer Singh Bra in his wonderful monograph, Tech Life Ghettoville, Eski. I'll close with just a small note on these wonderful poets and their significance in my own life as a writer and as a publisher. Nat, for instance, read at the first ever poetry reading I curated, organized, and hosted. Nisha read at the launch for my debut chapbook collection in 2017. Both of them have become my chosen poetic family, or the chosen family that poetry chose for me. People doing important, innovative, and incredible work on a scene that had a palpably native British texture, and whom, in many respects, have moved on from those halcyon days in Sussex and elsewhere, where experimental writing of this kind once had roots and shoots, evolving now into renowned and well-loved artists whose work straddles the boundary between critical theory, sound arts, performance, poetry, and a radical political commitment to human dignity and social justice. In my reading, listening, and perambulating engagements with both Nat and Nisha's growing works, I note here the strident, palpable, and worlding textures that arise from solidarity as a domain of possibility. As I look back upon my own work as a publisher and a writer, I know that it is that imaginary domain of possibility that they made possible for me that has been a guiding principle, and it gives me enormous pleasure to be here with you all to gather and hold space for a conversation with them. Thank you.
Now let's take a listening walk. Gander to ground in the swallowing heart. In the figure 8 wake of a swan, how we sound. Our feet, sea skimming ears of the world the song this tune could be. Whorled surface, suspend grammar, harp deep, out be. Going home. I found, I just didn't need, drone, just didn't. Oh. Sense organs cut through the tune this tune could be, just didn't need. This tune takes place inside. What? Inside earworm, in indignity. Strings lay down staircase, impossible staircase, finding itself to be, going home, just didn't, getting. Anyone the sound of living alone? I found a way to be, what? Be home, drone unaccompanied. Anyone the sound of going home? Super mundane and supreme. You, the harp sunsets, blaze. Harp sink us into ourselves, dark wash away the lie of heart's low lights. Consciousness snail within us, silence, blaze. This tune upscales us monochromatically. What? Moon drive us on to electro-organic heights. Impossible staircase, get us nowhere, get us raised up ultra light beam lights. To going home, to stolen home, to reclamations getting nowhere, to down home, drill down, drop off white bread heights, brave background. Unscrew, tune, invert, ear drip, buttery, be. Electro-organic slide we sound. Sunset all the friends we knew. Sound, play with luminosity. Invite light to the party, sunrise too soon. Most freest silence. Anyone else? The sound of self-inverting, self-cochlear lawlessness, a means of getting away. Anyone else laid down by lights, shells shot through with countersunk holes, body, bolt holes, tubelet, home having home as its main cause. Anyone else bodying home, body having home as its main cause, snail shell, battle cry, resonance following, most subtlest sound. Pour sand in ears to catch lightning strike. Trail sand through body, home, grit, glissando, irritate, ear, glass, worm, too late. My harp sings despite itself, squirms heartily. My sun sets, you, ooh, ow, ow, lightning struck, my ears emit, I, supreme, ow, emanate earwax, homing device, this, out, be, this, out, be. Out be. Govinda Jai Jai. She generates a party out of mantras. Somebody's face down at the party, too full, too soon, i.e. ready to evolve. Syllabic bloat, causal stress when I bursts in. The aloneful party falls apart in a field, together, apart, together. In a field of one, a battlefield, the supreme eyes. She generates a chorus of skull cracks. Subtle sounds descend into chorus. One must be identified with the sound of the spheres. Oh, ow, ow. Sound out cracks in the foundations of the field, buttercups and cracks in a gladness too soon. Gladness only exists only too soon. Anyone else clapping? Everybody comes in on the clap only too soon. Gladness comes in between claps. There are fields and fields of buttercups in between claps. Battlefields. We is herded in claps. Existence is the gross effect caused by vibrations of the existential potential. One is identified with the whole world and thus indifferent to it. One must identify the void in the whole world's heart with the void in one's own heart. The party changes its tune. I, the sound of living together. I, ow, ow, tickle the spark in disharmonic intervals. You, ooh, oh, cup, chin, ah. In a field, somebody's falling. Buttercup tickles my living alone, falling in buttercups alonefully when she, little mothers of the phonemes, all clothed with ears, germinating worlds to keep word-bound speech-clad lovers apart. Phonetic mitosis on the tip of the tongue. In a field, somebody's tidying. The cowherd gladly tidies, charts success of any kind. Everybody isn't victorious over light, i.e. resigning it willfully. The claps slow down for emphasis, failing rites of primogeniture, face down in the interval before the last vibration, the last clap back. Our dissolution is the pinpricking of tensions. To a divine ear, tensions, homogeneity. The divine ear must be dissolved. What if we took an unraveling warp? Away from the kernel of bourgeois history, steeped in guilt, defensive walls can't dam its secretions. Away from the essence of fascist nationalistic history, the rotten rope of destiny manifesting against life. Away from the stranglehold of stories told and retold only to uphold oneself. When spelunking forgotten dreams. Stop just before the entrance. The sheet of running water or loamy smell. This is the last sunlit station. The rest is groove. The architecture of the cave helps people and animals sync up with space-time as well as with each other. Like the internet shapes our built and social environments and is shaped by them. The finest paintings are far from the entrance, but no one controls the buzzer. You can call your way in. Call then. Utter any silent sound or informational noise. The cave will respond. A little away, come close, come close. You can trust this voice, can you? You can hear your way to belief the deeper you move in its stuff. Brush fingers, sticks, and bones against stalactites. Compare the effects to xylophones or sound bars or whatever feels right to your sonic context. Stamp your muddy handprints on the walls, seeding your subjectivity to speleothem. Feel your way into millions of years of drip, flow, gush, never dry, never still. Even if you cannot perceive the wetness and movement with your fingers, ears, nose, you can. You can. A shimmering carpet of crystals, an assemblage of golden eagles, porcelain skulls, bio-glitter, bhindi glue, lip melt, flute, fur. Every sound in space-time still resounds. Every sound ever made leaves a scratch in the field. The field is the recording, every sound ever made reproducible. The air swathes warmer here. Breath ripples further than you intended to go or thought possible. Maybe you'll ignite a torch to signal reciprocity. Maybe you'll awake surrounded by bear scratches, horses, bird cages, shapeshifters, or by bears, artists, ceremonies, spirits. Will you dance? Will you boggle? Will you enter another kind of sleep? Here you are folded in. You cannot see or be seen. You are out of the state's earshot, beyond cannons and espionage. Here you can sleep for millions of years, borne by your secrets which will never be mined. You are the matter in which splendor is hidden. You are the sculptor who shrouds their work.
We Creopolitan, our hinging on relations, our senses of bodying, whispers humming to no flesh, sensate taste, salt weather cane, humidity woven through, displaced, to be anywhere here, all possible futures, undue logics of land, in the hyperreal of the spew tea, the swear, fashion bodily, dyke bitch being smeared, color sink, such potential faggotry, the shades press to you, or gorgeous pretend, change of use anthropos, in your blessed vulnerability, remember what we live. Membranes deteriorate, toxicity, our fevers and constellations trying to unstick garish riches, preached to scold all corners, patterns for thought, feeling, action, and whole blessings, pleasures, oxygen, fear, tears, look me in the eyes with love. On the stand, list your horrors, proclamations and divestments, pull blood from the crown and ideo, your archaic printed murders, bludgeon, civilized to this day. Against the name of your inflictions, your rubble and basic hatred, turn hands to gather stolen our lives and bodies back. And girl, who are you to abandon the beautiful, jettison ways of being, pursed on edge, on song, speed, surf, ace, divine,
dream, our
tuned,
gazettas, archives,
luxurious, the earliest known sensations, adorned, silk woven, learning your rhythm from canvas, or lubrication for your soul. Coarse edges, ecstatic, dissolve with love, open soul, all eyes, generosity. We gossip as daggers, as tender, as chiffon. We feed as commune, sneak laughter, lust across, borders hysterical, our insolent freedom, armed with vigorous loving. Oh, tragic national consensus, tearing continental flows. Stars and we gossip as daggers had tender, your impositions, chiffon, bitch beings, 500 classify evidence, carbon date, pulled up medieval bones. And all inspirited life. We will exercise your explorations from land, all your orders and abstractions. The disappeared will live. Justice is a practice to unfold, reverse the future, turn the truth up from soil. In the everyday, compelled, all that crashes with pandemic, all that's held against need. And after our affections, we gossip as daggers, as tender, dozed regressive histories, bloom alternate truths. Stars and we gossip as daggers had tender, your impositions, chiffon, in our form 500 years. We impossible siblings, eternity and circuits, and constellations and cyclones, these earthly suffocations, architectures, mutations, orbits, proclamations, capitals, scold all asserted shards and flames. All we became in the provocations. Particles, alarmed, stars and we gossip as daggers had tender, your impositions, chiffon, bitch beings, 500 years. We impossible siblings, and circuits, and shaven flesh and locks, dined on, trying to on the stand list your horror.
Say the divine ear must be dissolved. Divinity isn't the pondering hand that compounds the inequitable, measuring out breath in disposable cups. Isn't the missionary's boot, but the microbial symphony on the sole of his boot. All those life forms without eyes and mouths, who comb and branch, inconceivable. For Organic Music Society. We could put our ears to the flotsam and jetsam, crack doorways to ocean the listening. This listening could be like echo untethered, now gaining, now space cruising. sci-fi whales, like mythological swans, like world historical elephants, sing. Ha, sa, help us. Somebody help us out. Let's go away from formal miseducation, golden faces pressed between pages, that schooling in the development of underdevelopment, that naturalizing of disunity. Away from the servant of severance and all such passive constructions. Amass the never, never, nevers till all are free. But about who? They'll check the balances in heaven, right? How many skies? What if we felt a groove? It's the simplest song. All the children know it. Let's sing to ourselves, send selves back where shadows fall evenly, undo the lies that silence binds, furrow and furl every surface. I swallow radiolarians, pinpricks of light to pattern the throat, make a song of splinters without predetermined source. All you hear at the heart of ha, sa, infinities, chiasmus. And we'll walk through the clouds of us, wet in the mist of us, crystallizing the dance this decision could be. Smudges of breath, cracked faces in doorways, the unraveling bundle that sings at the hearth. To chorus the warp, to warp the contours. Whoa. Unfolding maps of ascension's tracks. Thank you.
This poem's called Shields. It's written after Adania Shibli, and it was written on October the 18th, 2023, after the bombing of the Al-Akhbi Arab Hospital in Gaza. If language proliferates into seams of all worlds, precious, focused, attached, hanging to smallness, and if both speaking and oxygen primed detonate status, treatment, embodiment, silence tracking disintegrations, the repetitions of body minds on barb politics, and on the cycles of memory you are not to be eliminated. Language weeping holds forms, pages refusing narrative or coherence, or to move when held at gunpoint, denied acculturated rights. And if the roads profuse with blood refuse to disappear in the threat to every aspect of vital substance, before the fire derelict of the imperial dreams of colonists unfixed, toxic, claiming to last. And if the bile we expel, crouched low, venerate, emerging illegible, exile, paled but draped in expansive colours that fall by our own perspiration, to floors tiled, thorned, aromatic, rare, burnt, perturbed, antisocial, And all the parts of the narrative are removed, inspected for political motive, rebranded, reordered, disappeared, executed by air raid or firing squad when they weren't even in narrative form in the first place. Unmade, gun-shy, with adhered fractures of belonging. Could we relearn lines of protection, lines in lust, singing dismantled melodies and absolute blues, grievous of these decades, years, minutes, dissolving, changing phase, flame licked, as the distance between cities multiplies, becomes a gulf of borders, impossibility, occupation, apartheid, hostility, the burning planet one horrific hour at a time in Gaza. Glean, hunger, intimate, ocular, in admission crescendo profanities into the vacuum, into the void. If even the suspension of hope promises something more, if even the poets are also dead, our lovers silenced, memory kindling, animating lines incandescent to negate abstractions, capital, land, nationhood, reaching beyond solipsism to a future. And if it's possible to forget the sensations of love, but so easy to erase its absence, eyes adjusting to the seasons executed one by one, clothes accordingly dried in sweat into generational anxiety, the mobilization of spirit to serve patriarchal dominance, trapping captives fallen like trees in deep forest, shredding like technological vibrations, gazed in the whirl of a drone, no longer visible in the parochial cities without music or movement or fluids. And if next time they shoot us, we refuse to die, held in the permanent sounding finality of poems, the tonality of ink. Our bodies like dreams of the world, our bodies like dreams lying on the floors of the nations of the world, words gripping spines, hands, cognitives animating the next flesh. And if the nations of the world blame a people for the war crimes they enact against you, keep your grammar in the forge, casting the magnitude of violence in the everyday. If the map grasping the poem around you could spare the bullet at the spirit at the checkpoint, and if the state of affairs robs you of the power to speak, and if we admitted writing was everything, but it was never the only thing, dreaming in trauma of the horrors of loss, when the subjects of trauma are foot soldiers of nations, and I wake in the library of endless night, overhearing you in books disappeared in service of national cohesion, indexing practices, politics under the logics of surveillance. And if the books of our friend are to be claimed from processes of complicity, letting the notes of the words swaddleless adorn like Parisian capes, shawls from Hebron or Srinagar. Cloaked, nameless, anonymous, we meet in a vigorous quiet, the debris of the cities of the world collapsing about us, enveloping thought, setting alight the author's subjection, inverting the weave of community and encampment, breathing with the prescriptions of being, holding the cup of thought, released, refusing status as evidence or motive, inverting in small sounds the hardest fictions of nations, the justifications of violence and defense and genocide. And if even that could taste like the nectar of a lover or the word of a friend departed, turning to spare the blinding, and the poem only offers truth, a soft pillow, and some type of love, when all of these have become tools of division and separation, and each extremity of violence manufactured and made routine in the same service of colonization and ethnic cleansing. And if we meet avian music wheeling with a pulsating encompassed grief, a physical lament, auspicious days ringing with mortar, tear gas, deserted Creopolitan streets discharged missiles at or from rooftops, groves skylit, white phosphorescent. It was never like the narratives of empires fabricated from enclosed trees and factories busted of unions, Texac crude, petroleum-based. It cohered accumulation through war, dispossession, extraction, and defense, held steadfast to not in our name. Maneuvering to align the technologies of genocide, to criminalize the acts of dissidence of ordinary peoples, proposing they are the real terror, to target hospitals or ancient mosques or churches or children, reaching beyond solipsism to a future, crouched low, venerate, emerging illegible, exile, paled but draped, for nations to become synonyms of ethnicities and to fear all the same. Palestine was not stolen in a day. Apartheid, hostility. And the poem refuses to beg for forgiveness, to remove, to appeal to moral sentiments. So tonight rebranded, reordered, disappeared, another hospital or block of apartments will be the target labeled a terrorist base. And that any number of lives is a sacrificial price for American and European-backed imperialism. And the poem only offers truth, a soft pillow, and some type of love. And when all of these have become tools of division and separation, no more genocide, no more military industrial complex, only offers truth, no more dying, a soft pillow, and some type of love. And if in it were fashioned the shelters from tanks, rusted stops in the streets by the body of our friends or lovers or grandparents. And in these shelters we ate yogurt with honey, drank peppermint tea to soothe nerves frayed intergenerationally. And then, awake, lay lines for you held by the fallacy of lyric, the hope of poetics, trying to sense and feel and move into a world in a manner that might yet stop a war crime. And if words gripping spines, hands, cognitives grasping the poem around you could spare, the words gripping spines, hands, cognitives, they even mine every last section of land, forging beaches from your dead, from the bones of your dead. Even if healthcare is a target or a ration, even if they decry their own use of mercy, bombs, weapons, even if they turn out to once been our friends, those who call themselves our fellow citizens. Words gripping spines, hands, cognitives animating the poem around you could spare, the bullet at the spirit at the checkpoint. And the poem retreats from the demonstration called for our protection. When the protesters don't check how we are traveling home or if there is home or safety. And moving through the world cloaks us in a continual atmospheric of violence, the mobilization of spirit to serve patriarchal dominance, trapping captives fallen like trees in deep forest, shredding like technological vibrations. And if the prashad was dates from Ramallah, and then rice pudding with cloves and cardamom, maple sugar and strawberry jam. And here it was simply a cessation of work, a wildcat we laid down in an honest vulnerability, practicing the softest form of strength. Committed to an empathy next time all night writing letters to friends forged and bonded amidst harm. Practicing the softest form of strength. And if next time they shoot us, the escalation of war, to die, a permanent solidarity beyond ourselves. And if you can cross the apartment and not to make coffee, primed, stranded like a heart that never lifts, or a dust that becomes part of the fabric, and if I am grinding the beans, and all the parts of the narrative are removed, rebranded, reordered, disappeared, executed, wrapping the fabric emerald clasped around our breasts, or merging illegible, exile, paled but draped in expansive colours, tying the braid around the wrist of a sibling in the refusal of gendering. Merging illegible, exile, paled but, and if the radial cones in the eyes of her lover multiply and she doesn't close her eyes again. Merging illegible, exile, paled, and if the colours don't yet return to her dreaming. And if everyone is ready to hate the haters, but no one is ready to love the oppressed. Words gripping spines, hands, cognitives animating the next flesh. And in the swell of silence, our body minds feel the crescendo of forms swaying with beat and bass and synthesis, cry out into choral hells hidden under the matter of poems. And not one phrase of speech passes between us. Visions thrilling, realities unbearable, ordinary. In insolent, if the map grasping grievous. The poem around you could spare the bullet at the spirit. The voice spared by the body mind itself, psychic curator. And if the state of affairs robs you of the power to speak, continues to be held steadfast. Words gripping spines, hands, cognitives animating the next flesh. And if next time they shoot us, we refuse to die. Held in the, and if in thinness, grasping, extending, come. They, your hair's precision, muscular whirring, stethoscopic as waves filter. Living by the shortest sentences of the most poetic manifestos. Cradling the howl of the dog. Thanks.
Hello. Hello, everyone. Thank you, Nat and Nisha. That was amazing. It's quite hard to follow Nat's deeply moving poem at the end, and I'm sure that all of us would want to presence the Palestinian people in their struggle for liberation as we have the pleasure of being in conversation here amongst you all. And that kind of made me want to ask you about political positionality in your work, actually, and kind of leap from there. Would that be okay? So I was reading Annie Goh's wonderful essay in the Bodies of Sound collection published by Silver Press. And for those who haven't read that, Annie gives a decolonial feminist reading of Echo, both in the kind of Greco-Roman goddess and that kind of myth, in which a liberation from a kind of patriarchy becomes possible once we open up Echo to understanding radical alterity, which basically means that the echo is released from constantly being tied to its original sound. Both of you have echoes in your work. There's a lot of looping, there's a lot of repetition of sound, and I can't help but hearing in that a kind of articulation of a political position, walking with and attending to the situation of a body in space. Nat, you spoke earlier today about the links between your work and picket lines and public protest, and I thought a lot about Judith Butler's kind of the idea of the plural and performative right to appear that they write about in Notes Towards a Performative Theory of Assembly. So could you both speak to us a little bit about the role of the body and or embodiment with both the textual production of your writing and sonic iterations of your work, and how that may be or may not be an articulation of politics?
Sure. Hi, everyone, and thanks, Azad, for the question, which is
convoluted.
It's a difficult one to begin with, but I guess I'll maybe begin with beginnings and what you were saying about Echo and Annie's essay, and wanting as part of as a kind of an origin story for my own writing and poetics, and also becoming sort of understanding the politics of poetics, or becoming politicized in through friends and teachers, becoming the origin story being about being against origins, and against that kind of idea of a sort of singular point, a kind of hierarchical position from which everything kind of falls down, whether that's, well, I was thinking, okay, so if I kind of go backwards a little bit, the body. and sound and poetry and meaning. And Nat was talking earlier about sometimes putting meaning, semantic meaning, as secondary or even tertiary, and what happens if you place sound first, which isn't often where poets start. And when I was writing my first book, States of the Body Produced by Love, it's very much an exploration of and a eventually a renunciation of origins. So thinking about sort of South Asian heritage, Indian heritage, Hindu, and having a Hindu background. And I became interested in learning Sanskrit, which is upheld certainly by the current right-wing Hindu nationalist government as being a sort of the origin of knowledge, the origin of language at the top, this kind of privileged position of the Indo-European language family, and any knowledge that sort of originates in Sanskrit is actually weaponized against other forms of knowledge and other ways of knowing and other languages and ways of sort of relating. So what interested me about Sanskrit, though, as part of a kind of Hindu practice, is that in the way that Latin used to be in Europe, it wasn't understood by most of the people who heard it. It was knowledge of the language was restricted to the priesthood, the priestly caste, and they told the sort of their way of sort of transmitting knowledge was through recitation, so whether through mantras or reciting sacred texts, and they explained that people didn't need to understand what they were saying; they could receive revelation through sound, so through just the sonic components of the language, not actually understanding the sort of semantics, and so there are ways in which that withholds knowledge, and it makes it completely exclusive, that you only receive it if you're initiated and in a very ruthlessly structured caste-based society where knowledge is passed down from Brahmin man to Brahmin man. But I was also interested in how sound could open things up as well and make accessible other kinds of meanings, because you don't have to be initiated to be able to hear. That doesn't take into consideration different ways of hearing and people who are hearing impaired, which is another kind of consideration for all of the things I'm saying. But what happens if we do think about sound as a source of revelation? So coming back around to sort of origin stories and politics and the body, I guess it relates to what does it mean for listening to be a way of hearing, a way of knowing, that privilege is something else, and maybe privilege is an embodied experience and in an environmental experience as well, listening with, and listening, alongside deep listening practices like via Paulina Oliveros. So those maybe are ways that I would sort of bring some of the things together maybe from earlier.
That was amazing, great.
Here.
Yeah. Oh my God, I've got that thing where I've been talking so much and I'm like, I could talk more. Let's not try. I guess I'll maybe speak a little bit about the imperative, what feels like the like political, but not just political, the kind of like, it's like a social, ethical imperative. It's just an imperative, it's an embodied imperative to respond to what, I guess, thinking in particular about the genocide in Gaza, but also thinking about so many of the other horrors that have kind of been piling up in the last in this decade, in the 2020s, right? To act, but also, and that's not to say, like I was already talking about this earlier, not that poetry is a stand-in for direct action, because that too, and that's something that's where my body has been in the last 2 years, but thinking about the imperative for I'm like, can I say something like to use the body as a or use one's body as a medium for the reception of the kinds of concerns, thinking, poetics, like forms of like both like articulated grief, but also like the inarticulate kind of low-level forms of grief or despair, or what, like these negative affects, these negative feelings, these often destabilizing or paralyzing emotions that many of us have encountered. I say many of us, I mean people who are conscious about the world and about people and who care about struggle and everything, care about the survival of the indigenous peoples of this world. And that for me, that's, I think, some of the things that I was trying to think through. And imperatives, like the word that I think I composed into describing the composition and the sharing of that poem. And it's a poem that I felt really mixed about myself and always a bit like conflicted about my political position in relation to it. But then being like, okay, I'm in Scotland, we've had quite a lot of Palestinian solidarity space, in Edinburgh in particular, organised by Palestinians. And so I feel like it's a cultural and social space that we were all we who are in solidarity with Palestine and Palestinians have been welcomed into since that autumn 2023, since October 7th. And I don't know, I was trying to think about, so there's that, and when I say imperatives like in the composition to respond. And then in relation to echo, I feel like it's not just the sonic echo of using the loops, and obviously in this case that's kind of something I'm trying to foreground or think through, but simultaneously it's also in the text, right? I feel like there's a ton of echoes of the things that we were reading and listening to and thinking through in that particular moment, and not just the horrors in the news, right? Like thinking about both like Palestinian, but also a lot of like Lebanese, Beiruti kind of like culture felt very present in that moment, and that's all kind of in the sounding board of the poem as well. And
and that's great. And then maybe I'm going to take it back to the original question I was going to ask, which is about the formation of both of your kind of performance and sonic practices that have emerged from a poetry practice. Would it be fair to frame it in that way? Maybe it's not as linear as that, but I wonder if you could speak a little bit about the iterations that your work is now taking, where it's going, and also this kind of veering to the sonic. Where did that rise from you? Was there a formative moment with that?
Well, I think it relates to what I was talking about earlier, around revelation through hearing, through mantra. I was interested, in the kind of spiritual ideas about vibration and, chant, how certain kinds of recitation or chanting can sort of trigger vibrations that might connect you to other vibrating bodies, whether they're on Earth or, in the in space. So kind of interested in that, in sound in that way. And I was also actually echo it relates to, because a lot of my writing, as for all of us, have quite an intertextual practice, lots of quotes and allusions, but I was interested in dismantling the kind of academic framework of having to have quotation marks and a footnote, or a citation at somewhere at the end, and using actually echo and sort of sonic or musical allusions, sort of building them into a tapestry of poem, so that it could sound like lots of different things. It could sound like friends hanging out together with music playing, or it could sound like walking down a street and all of the kind of sonic experience of listening, that's the listening walk, or in a in a field somewhere, and just the experience of all the different life forms that you hear and can't hear but are there, making imperceptible sounds unless you have the technology to hear them. So thinking about how text could actually not exclude or only include via citation, but actually have woven in these sonic strains. So that's something I was thinking about. And I suppose, so it kind of went from there.
Can you repeat your question? Is that just 'cause I had it really clear?
No, it's all good. It was just about if there was something formative that encouraged you to take this sort of sonic articulation.
saving myself trying to do a one sentence description of the first half an hour of what I said earlier again, but like trying to be that there's something in the sonic expression that works something out that's in the poem that doesn't necessarily read, but feels like it needs to be I feel like there's a necessity to articulate it sonically, and and I think like more recently, I mean, I feel like when I'm showing all this stuff earlier of Sirens, Body and Faultlines, it's because in that's the space where I was working out all these questions around like, how do you bring noise on? I didn't say this actually. Using collage to bring noise, to bring this kind of like urban cacophony into the page, and that's not just a sonic cacophony; it's also like a visual like overload as well. And collage being the means to try and do that, and then at times that also shifting and being like, okay, so what happens when the collaged elements are actually like the collaged elements in a poem are actually like information about that comes from a social movement about how to resist immigration raids, right? And wanting those interruptions there in a way, and I feel like that kind of also that's like in the becomes part of the filter. It like sinks to the bottom and becomes kind of the filter of the substrate of the bed of the text or something. In the more recent work, maybe.
That's great.
Yeah, using my.
I could go on for a long time, but I really want to ensure that there's adequate time for students and faculty to ask any questions. So, has anyone got a question? Please do raise your hands. Annie has a roving mic.
You can always do the thing of you can ask a question while people are thinking about the question.
Me?
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, great. Okay. Yeah, I can do that. Well, what's coming next maybe is interesting because both of you have kind of more musical collaborations. Correct me if I'm wrong. And I wonder what that process is like of collaboration as a poet in that kind of more predominantly musical zone or iteration. And I wonder if you could speak to maybe some of the practicalities around that.
I can go first if you want, but musical collaborations. I shall share this clip of the performance we did for Arica, episode 11, like this time last year, me and Ailey Ormston. We were actually kind of match made by Counterflows, which was quite fun, and Arica, to work together to produce a performance of, I mean, I think at the end of it, we're both like, we could definitely work on this. So people were like, so you're a band, right? For me, that process feels, on the one hand, kind of easy, partly because I've been in many bands in my time. There's a familiarity about being in a sonic space around that. But rather being the one-woman band, though, I guess I was also thinking quite a lot about, I've spent quite a lot of time just doing like sonic experimenting with stereo, with thinking about the filters in space. And again, like trying to think about how to activate, to use language as vibration to activate something in the audience, right? And so there's something about that degree of play. What does it mean for the language to be the music, the poet, the voice to be the instrument to be working through, that feels constructive? I don't know. I'm not sure I've said anything of substance. It's fine. Nisha's in an actual band.
Well, I'm currently making, I am making an album, but I'm not, I always dreamed of being in a band, and I was thinking about, when I was at school, I was in a fake band called Free Range Eggs, and we just basically, we made music videos and artwork, but didn't actually play instruments or write songs. But
you're an art band.
Yeah.
Amazing.
but now I am in a band with two musicians in Newcastle, and we're just recording an album for Jazz North, and one of them, John Pope, is a double bass player, and comes from a sort of line of influence of Ornette Coleman and AACM, and the other, John Garner, is a violinist and shakuhachi player, and they both are very interested in small objects and instruments, Buddhist practice actually, and meditation through breath, in fact, and as well as other, like, as well as chanting and singing lullabies, and we've been working together. We were kind of arranged together, sort of like Nat, for a commission for a festival, but we just liked working together so much, and it's been a dream, and it's been so interesting working with musicians, because when you know, look at us, Nat's actually is doing much better, but we've got our stacks of books and papers, like we're always kind of heavy with stuff and material, and have our hands full, and plastic bags full of papers, and the musicians, they carry everything in their heads in a totally different way, and they genuinely play it by ear, and so they, we would do these kind of, I would be like, but how do we start? Do we need to prepare? I brought my notes. I'd be like, trying to sort of study, and or according to my understanding of what study is, and they've just really opened me and like invited me so warmly into this other world and way of being and playing together, and just free from worrying about mistakes. There's no such thing as the wrong thing. It's just trying things out, and it's open-ended. And if it doesn't work, it doesn't work, and then you just try something else out. And it just feels, it's so liberatory, and it's so much fun. So maybe you all probably know this already, but it's very
It's
new.
that thing of what comes, but when it comes back to that, you get to run with an idea, or just try it with try an idea, and that might be a phrase, or it might be something more. I mean, and I think that like also musically, like what happens when you're with the idea, where does that lead you? And maybe it's interesting because Annie's talking about the difference between poetry and like poetry's relationship to sound art, and it's like, I think maybe that's maybe one of the bits that we're encountering as people who are like, poets with papers.
Yeah, and just the fact that it's collaborative and social from the outset as well, because we are all poets who've done loads of collaborations, but there's something quite different about just like stepping into the studio or the wherever it is, and everything begins together in that moment of listening to each other. There's so.
That was such great answers, and it's given me loads to think about, just in terms of what the collaborative process between kind of sound arts and poetry is. Did we have a question from the floor? We have a couple. Awesome.
Yeah, hello. In your performance, you used lots of phonetics principles, as I understood, because you used different letters to convey different types of sounds. I was interested, what system did you use when you were planning these performances? I mean, did you use some system similar to, for example, note stuff like strafe? I'm not sure how it's called in English, but some plan. How did you plan to connect the text itself with the rational meaning to the phonetics principles that it should go with?
Do we take all the questions? Is that okay? Yeah.
Hello. Hi. Thank you for that. That was really great. My name's Roshni, and I feel like maybe my question is somewhat... Yeah, I don't know. Sorry, can you hear me now? Hi, sorry. I'll speak louder. Thank you for that. It was really interesting. My name's Roshni, and actually I think what I was going to ask was slightly connected to, I think, the question that was just asked over there. But I was thinking about what you were saying about echo and that kind of connection to echo and knowledge, and how you're kind of using that in your work. And I think a few of you mentioned a few ways you were sort of incorporating almost physical ways of using the voice and the kind of breath, and I noticed that when you were performing as well. And I wondered if you could just talk a little bit about your approach with that when you were sort of writing the poetry, or if it comes quite naturally as well.
You'll have to forgive me, I'm a bit of a Luddite when it comes to poetry, but I wanted to ask about you talked a bit about how the sort of sound informs your. Is it not working? Oh, there we go. Sorry, Luddite with microphones as well. Yeah, I wanted to ask about how you sort of negotiate the sort of visual aspect of like poetry and text. I saw quite a bit in Nat's sort of lecture earlier about how she sort of frames the text around the page. But yeah, I was curious about how you guys deal with that.
And hopefully this is a nice simple question to end with. I was just struck in your poem, Nisha, the image of the stalactites and playing with the stalactites. Was that something you actually did, or was that something you imagined afterwards? Or just would be interested in why you talked about it and what struck you about it. Thank you.
I think you should go first.
Okay, well, I can start with that one, because that had a particular source, which was watching the Werner Herzog film, The Cave of Forgotten Dreams. And so thinking about cave paintings not as kind of fixed images or still images, but actually as a kind of prototypical cinema, which is, you know, the theory. And so like the way, if you're in a cave and you have a torch with fire, the way that the fire flickers and makes the image move, and clapping and the kind of different resonant parts of as you kind of descend deeper into the cave. So that kind of cave imagery, some of it came from just watching that film and trying a sort of ekphrastic response. So like trying to translate some of the images that I was seeing, as well as some of the sounds that both was hearing and also that were being described or imagined in that film. So that is a kind of, maybe that's a simple answer. There's probably other answers, but that was one. Thanks.
Okay, so I'll try and talk about systematization. So I guess I'm not using defined phonetic system, but I guess there's like a language in the score. There's a score in the language that I read that is like emerged over a number of years, not counting them, in my writing, and that has really developed over, also like when I say emerged over a number of years, it's also like developed through basically just like setting myself up with problems to figure out through reading or through performance, like setting myself up linguistic problems, like I was like inventing new punctuation to try and like elaborate a form of grammar that reflects this kind of urban noise or whatever. And then I'd say it's really, in terms of using the loops, it's really like it's got to a stage where I really think of it as like a separate creative process of like figuring out how to turn the text into a score in terms of live performance and sound. And it's always kind of there. There's always like a degree of, I don't want to say of trial and error, but there's definitely a degree of error, which is always fun, as you've seen today. And I guess I'm always trying to like experiment with like using filters can like shift the registers of the language, or like using simultaneity and using stereo or more as a means of like breaking up where the poem exists physically in the room, like sonically and physically as sound waves in the room. And it feels like it's a distinct process from writing or editing or whatever, or from reading. So it's, because I feel like it's almost like a maths problem sometimes. I feel like I'm just like trying to set myself some kind of like weird musical math problem. You're talking about math rock. It's a musical math problem. We have one more question, didn't we?
Well, there was about the visual components.
Visual. You should talk about that.
Well,
because I think this person has seen what I was talking about earlier. But we can both talk about it.
Well, I was actually, I could just share the experience of watching you and listening to you perform with the text behind you, and then in the collaboration with Ailey, and just thinking about what the visuals, we were reading the text, we were looking at the text as an image, we were reading the text in the subtitles, we were listening to Ailey's music, we were listening to you, we were watching your body, and Ailey's, and obviously it was curated by the camera and how that was moving, but thinking about how all of these different things like open up the poetry into this like multi-dimensional experience, but which throws our attention around in different ways, and because sometimes you're attending simultaneously, but you can never be focusing simultaneously. So the sort of the channels are kind of opening and closing depending on where you're kind of zooming in and out, and that creates, I felt, for me personally, a much more embodied experience of listening to just sort of a different kind of sitting passively to a stream of words kind of spilling out someone's mouth. So that was something that I just wanted to share.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, in terms of the space and the page, I guess like part of working in this kind of like, I mean, we used to call it late modernist, but who knows what we're calling it now.
Still late modernist.
With late modernist crossed out with a double strike through. Can we just do that? Kind of like lineage, which I guess like there's this kind of like grand gestural like open field poetics that emerges out of Charles Olson from Black Mountain College, kind of like 1950. But in that, there's the revealing of the space of the page, or whatever the canvas of the space that the text is in, as something that's, I mean, I'm doing these gestures already. I feel like I'm always trying to like figure out how the text does operate as a score that's like expressive and perceptual in how it's laid out on the page, which is then like more recently has become this like direct translation into how I'm performing it, in the sense of like, oh, it even becomes the left-right like framework that I'm using sonically, or it becomes like these elements of like I'm pulling certain things out of from one side of the page into the other. I really just I feel like I'm almost like allergic to writing a left-align poem, but the nature of apparitions, because the poems are all really small and condensed in this kind of 9-syllable form, they kind of look like squares, so they kind of, but I guess I'm also trying to move between these two things, where sometimes you make something that's formal and condensed and really small, right? It's like working in short form, and then I find in my reaction to that, I want to make something that's long and expansive and gives me room to maneuver, which is maybe like, the more operative, the mode of writing that I find more like, fluid and I can work with in a way. But it's really labor intensive as well. So.
I'm afraid that's all we've got time for.
Yeah, good time.
Thank you so much for being here. Thank you, Annie. Thank you, Nisha and Nat. Can you join me in a round of applause for our wonderful poet?
Thank you for your reading.
Thank you all so much. That was fantastic. I'd just like to say that we're going to try and kind of continue this conversation, hopefully get Nisha back for the talk that you're all welcome to, but we have Thursday afternoon guest lectures for sound art students, open to all UAL staff and students, and we also stream them on Zoom for the general public. So we're hoping to get Nisha back, and then hopefully also Nat and Azad back to do a kind of continuation of this conversation. So please kind of watch out, and come again next time. We're now going to go to the dark room bar just here at LCC. You're all very welcome, and you can all get a drinks token from me because we've been so generously supported by the Student Experience Fund. So please stay and hang out if you can. Thank you again to our guests, and thank you to our wonderful technicians, Maria and Ivana, for supporting. Thanks so much for coming, everyone.